when it first started happening, scientists said, "Oh, well, these are anomalies." So, we've got our history, and we're sure it's right. And then here's an anomaly, and we'll put it over here. We'll come back and look at it later. Well, now there are so many anomalies. The anomalies are telling the new stories.
I'd like to welcome back to the show returning champion, Greg Braden. How you doing, Greg?
Hey, well, thank you for that warm introduction. It's good to start as a champion today. I'm doing well. I am coming to you as before from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I've got to tell you, this day with you is the first day in 2 weeks we haven't seen rain and snow. So you brought some sunshine to the high desert. I'm happy to be with you.
I'm glad I could help you, sir. I'm glad I could help you. Our last conversation was such a hit with our audience, and I think we made plans right after our first conversation, even before that other one was released. We're like, we got to keep talking. I have to come back. We have to make something happen. So I know you're a very busy man. I appreciate you coming back on the show. And today's conversation really wanted to tackle something that you know a little bit about in regards to ancient civilizations, technologies of ancient civilizations, spirituality in that space as well. Sure. So I'll just start with a very easy question. Who built the pyramids?
Well, so I'll start with an easy answer to lay a foundation. Sure. To the answer to that question, if I can. When I was in school back in the Midwest of this big, beautiful country we live in, 1950s, 1960s, I was taught at that time what we are still teaching our children today, and that is that civilization began in an isolated location in what today we call the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and it began in a primitive state and evolved in a linear fashion, slowly, gradually, over a long period of time, to what we have today. The problem with that story, Alex, is the evidence doesn't support it, and there is still there's a battle to maintain what is called the standard model when it comes to our history, when it comes to civilization, when it comes to science, when it comes to physics, when it comes to human origins. There's a battle to maintain this static story. Excuse me, it was developed, in late 1800s, early 1900s, even though the evidence no longer supports it. So the new discoveries are now telling us that rather than a single cradle of civilization, excuse me, in the Tigris-Euphrates, rather than a single cradle, that there now appear to have been at least 5 simultaneous cradles of civilization. And some of those are very familiar to us. There was one in China. There was one in the Tigris-Euphrates. That was Mesopotamia. There is the Indus Valley. Mysterious technologies have been found buried in the Indus Valley and what now is India and Pakistan. There was Corral in northern Peru. There was Mesoamerica. There was the area in what we now call the UK and Europe and that part of the world. So these 5, or depending on how you look at them, maybe 6 simultaneous civilizations. And Egypt. Egypt was certainly a part of that. And this is a long answer to your question. They appear to have been simultaneous. There appears to be a communication. There's a continuity of knowledge between these civilizations in terms of agriculture, the ability to grow large amounts of food in hostile environments to feed large populations, certainly mathematics, certainly architecture, multi-story buildings. It's no easy feat to build these multi-story structures the way they were built, and a knowledge of the cosmos that was so advanced, Alex, in many instances, it was discounted as myth until the 20th century when our own satellites began telling us more about the neighborhood that we live in, our solar system neighborhood, and lo and behold, these ancient traditions had it right on. So the question that comes up often is, where did these civilizations come from? And I think the answer to that question may be the answer to who built the pyramids. so that's why I wanted to lay that foundation. What we know is that I'm a geologist by degree, and I rarely get to use that degree anymore. With a strong background in the life sciences, math, physics, computer science, cosmology, and archaeology. And I say that, once again, because it's that multidisciplinary background that helps me to stay current in many different fields as new fields of science, as new discoveries are being revealed. And I got to tell you, what we're going to talk about in this program, it's no secret in the scientific community. It is simply, there's a resistance to embracing it in the mainstream. So mainstream textbooks, mainstream classrooms, and the reason is because the pushback from the religious community, from the political community, certainly from the technological community, and much more. So what I'm saying to you is peer reviewed. It's out there in the open literature. It's just not something that we often hear about. So I'll just the mystery is, where did those simultaneous advanced civilizations come from? And that might be where we want to go with this. But I'll stop there and see if it makes sense and where you'd like to go.
Yeah, I would love. Yeah, let's dive into where these ancient civilizations come from, because it is such a mystery to, I mean, anyone who has a logical mind to even look at the pyramids and believe the story that we've been told. It just doesn't make logical sense.
Let's talk about the pyramids for a little bit. I had my first opportunity. I had studied the pyramids since I was a kid. You know, I've been fascinated by this stuff. You know, I was 5 years old. My mom was helping me to read books by Edgar Cayce about lost civilizations, and we were memorizing the planets in the solar system and the names of the dinosaurs and the kings of Egypt. So I've been fascinated by this stuff for a very long time. My first journey into Egypt was 1986, and I was just astounded by what I saw. Now, that was a very different Egypt from what we see today. There are a lot of places now that are restricted, and they have been revamped, you know, for public consumption. It was much more raw back in the 1980s, 1990s. So, but the pyramid, and we talk about pyramids, there are pyramids all over the world. And it's the similarity of those pyramids that brings to mind the question, where did they come from? But typically when people talk about pyramids, they're talking about 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau in Egypt. And interestingly, the largest of those is called the Great Pyramid, and it's not the one that people show in the pictures, because the Great Pyramid does not have a capstone. It's flat on top. That capstone was lost at some point in history. There's another one of the 3 that does have a capstone, and that's the one that the news anchors and television and movies, they always call that the Great Pyramid, and it's not. But there are so many, I mean, we could do a whole program on the mysteries of that single structure alone. It's over 400 feet tall. It is made of massive blocks of limestone. When I was there, I went back in 1989, and there was a scientific group that was trying to recreate the Great Pyramid. And the first thing that they discovered was that none of the equipment, they were using Caterpillar tractors and forklifts and things like that. None of the equipment that we had at that time could lift the blocks, the 20-ton blocks of the pyramid. So they had to go to the Caterpillar tractor company and have commissioned them to build a special device that they then could use to build the pyramid. And after 6 months, the Egyptian government told them to clean up their mess and go home. They simply could not replicate the technology. The way, when we see that pyramid, what we're seeing actually is the part of the structure that was never meant to be seen. So there were essentially 3 layers of the pyramids of Giza and the Great Pyramid. The outer layer was encased in highly polished limestone, looked like marble, white, that would have reflected that light in just a magnificent way. And there are only a few layers of that left on one side at the bottom, because it has been stripped away for convenience, used in other buildings throughout Cairo in other mosques and other, primarily in other mosques and other structures that are there. So what we're seeing now is the inside that was never meant to be seen. And these are the tiered limestone blocks, and inside of that is built around the rooms themselves are granite, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, massive, 50, 60, 70 ton blocks that are so highly polished. We can't do this with our technology today. They're less than 1/1000th of an inch of tolerance between the stones, and there's no mortar holding these together, and they've been there for centuries. The mathematics involves the mathematics of circumference of the Earth and the diameter of the Earth and the Earth's relationship to the moon, our relationship to the magnetic fields of the planet. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So the question is, how was it done? And obviously, these were not primitive people that were doing this. So when I was there in 1989, another scientific group was there, and they were given access. This is the only time this has ever happened. They were given access to the casing stones that we see today and permission to drill core samples into those casing stones, because when you do that, you're destroying the stone. So, and part of it. So obviously it's not happening a lot. So they took the core samples, and I was a geologist. What you would expect to see if these were naturally occurring limestone blocks taken from the surrounding limestone in the area. There's a lot of limestone in the area. You would expect in those core samples to see what you see in naturally occurring limestone. You would expect laminations. You would expect microfossils, maybe visible fossils, because it was presumably from ocean bottom. And what they found in the core samples was just the opposite of that. There were no laminations. The entire block appears to be homogeneous. That's not what you see in nature when nature is laying those, year
layers
after year after year, the layers that go down. But they also found air bubbles, they found insects, and they found human hair. And when they did the chemical analysis, there were chemicals in the blocks that do not occur naturally. So the bottom line, I mean, this is a mind blower. This is 1989 when they found this, is the question, how did they get massive blocks of such high tolerance fitting perfectly 400 feet above the surface? And, if you watch the old movies and Charlton Heston, and Exodus, what you see is, 1 million slaves with ropes and log rollers, and they're rolling them up sand ramps and all that. And maybe that happened in some places later on. That very possibly could have happened later on. But that's not what happened with the three pyramids, the Great Pyramids on Giza. And what they found was, and what was published, and the pushback was tremendous, is that these stones are what are called, they're artificial stone. And the way they were created is they were, in fact, the stone itself was mined from nearby limestone quarries. It was then pulverized and mixed with a high-tech epoxy that allowed it to be plastic, kind of molten, or at least, soft, poured into molds. And then those molds, it was hardened, and the molds were poured on site. So that's why you could pour one block next to another and get 1/1000th of an inch tolerance. So, and I talk to people about this. I used to do a lot of programs on this, not so much anymore. But one of the questions people say, okay, well, what's the big deal? Artificial stone. Well, we didn't know really how to create this. So there's another interesting story that goes with this. In 1990, some of our viewers remember, the U.S. was about to invade Iraq in what was called the First Gulf War. I remember watching on TV. I was crying watching on TV. I didn't want to see it happen. Yeah. And there's a backstory to this. Saddam Hussein knew that America would, everybody knew because we broadcast that we were going to attack. He contacted an American artist who was using the technology that was used in the Great Pyramids. He contacted that artist because he wanted that technology to harden his bunkers before the U.S. forces attacked Iraq. He wanted that the epoxy-based stone so that he could harden those bunkers. And the U.S. got wind of this, U.S. government, and made it illegal. They forbade the artist from sharing his patented technology with Saddam Hussein that would have actually hardened those bunkers against the shock and awe that we were doing. So the point is the technology that was used to build the pyramids was so advanced. We weren't even really doing it until the 20th century, and it had military applications that were recognized pretty quickly.
And we still don't do it, and we still aren't using it heavily in our construction or anything like that right now.
No, not in. There are some artists that are using this, but you don't see it in construction. So this was a mind blower to the scientific community in 1989, because all the textbooks say those blocks were carved and then somehow mysteriously moved into place. Now we go down just adjacent to the Giza Plateau is the Great Sphinx, and I know most of our viewers are familiar with the Sphinx. And as a geologist, I was fascinated when I went there in '86, because what you see on the back of the Sphinx, on the rump, and this is a view that you don't often get in mainstream. They're always looking either a profile or right on at the face. But what you see is first of all, the Sphinx is carved from in place from a limestone bluff that was in place. So it's like there was a solid limestone bluff, and the Sphinx was carved, and then all the empty space around it is where the rock was cleared and moved away so that the Sphinx looks like this isolated, standing structure. So it was actually carved in place. When you go around to the back of the Sphinx on the rump, you see erosion marks that are about 12 feet deep in some places. And it's limestone. Limestone's a sedimentary rock. And when there are some parts of the limestone that are more resistant than others, and the softer parts are what get eroded away, creating these erosion marks. Well, there is a geologist from Boston University, Robert Schoch, and I know many people are familiar with his work now, because of the Charlton Heston special. Charlton Heston did a special on the Great Sphinx. And Robert Schoch was the first one that credibly questioned the age of the Sphinx from a geologic perspective. And what he did was he looked at those erosion marks, the same ones I'm looking at, and he said, well, this is obviously fluvial erosion. The term fluvial means high, it's based in water, and it would take high amounts of water moving quickly over long periods of time to create that kind of erosion. Up until that time, the scientists had called it aeolian erosion, which means it was wind blowing, sand like sandpaper and cutting it away. Robert Schoch said, no, it's obvious. This is fluvial erosion. And here's where the kicker comes in. The only time that there has been that kind of water, high amounts, fast-moving water over long periods of time, predates anything our textbooks are talking about when it comes to the pyramids. We're told the pyramids were built approximately 4,500, maybe 5,000 years ago. And the water that would be required for that erosion has not been seen since the melting of the ice at the end of the last ice age, which is right around 12, 13,000 years BP before present. Mm-hmm. So if that is the case, it means the structure had to already be existing at 12 to 13,000 BP. It had to be older than that, and this is where the problems are coming in today. Now, as a geologist, I was a member of a geologic organization, AAPG, American Association of Petroleum Geologists was the term, but it's about more than petroleum. And they have a journal, a peer-reviewed journal that comes out. Robert Schoch published his findings in AAPG, and the scientists, the real scientists, not the pop scientists, they looked at that data and they said, of course, of course, this is fluvial erosion. Of course, it had to have happened, 12, 13,000 years before present. They accepted it no problem. The geologists have no problem. The historians have a horrible problem because it means the history is wrong. And the evidence no longer supports the history.
And what I find fascinating, Greg, is that the pyramids, which were supposed to be the oldest of all of them, it seems to two things. One, it was said it was a king's chamber, yet there's nothing that's ever proven that at all. They've never found a corpse. There's no hieroglyphs. It completely goes against every other tomb we've ever found. And two, it seems that the technology keeps getting worse. So the pyramids, as they get closer to our time period, seem to degrade almost in the style that they're being built. They should be getting better, and there should be more of them out there, right?
Well, it is true, Alex, and it's something that this is not isolated. Well, first, I'm just going to back up. The way that they have dated the pyramids, you cannot date something that has not been alive. You can only carbon date something that has been living, breathing oxygen, carbon-based life. So stone cannot be carbon dated. The way that they have dated these pyramids is by estimating through, who was the king at what period of time, and, whose face is on a statue or something like that. And then here, this makes no sense at all. They also have found mice and rats inside the pyramid that are dead and mummified, and they carbon date those dead mice and rats. They might date to 4,000 or 5,000 years before present. There is nothing linking that dead rat to the origin of the pyramid. The rat could have come in 1,000 years ago, inside of the pyramid. But this is where the scientific community, they've got a story and they want to stick with it. And this is what I said at the beginning, there's a battle for what is called the standard model. And they had this all nice and buttoned up, nice and tidy, about the kings and the eras. So where all this is leading, if the Sphinx was already existing when the ice melted, and if the Great Pyramid was made using technology and incorporating mathematics that are so sophisticated, we didn't know it until recently. Where did that come from? All of this is pointing to, and it's something I've talked about extensively, is that civilization appears to be cyclic rather than linear. So the linear model is what we're teaching our kids. We began ancient Sumeria, Mesopotamia, 5,000, 5,500 years ago, and then you've got Rome and Greece and all of that. Well, all of that happens to have occurred within the most recent cycle that began about 5,000 years ago. And what the mathematics, what the archaeology is showing is that our history appears to be closely correlated to 5,125-year-long cycles. And there are 5,125-year cycles that make up one big cycle called a precession of the equinox. And I know some of our astronomers and astrologers are familiar with that. It's about 26,000 years. It is related to the way that Earth relates to the sun, and to the way that I don't want to go too deep with all of this, but our relationship to our solar system and the Milky Way. And if those of you remember the 2012 phenomenon, that's what this was all about. 2012 was the end of the fifth 5,125-year-long cycle, and the beginning of a new age, a new cycle that we're in right now. So when you plot that out, I didn't know we were going to talk about this. I would have brought some slides. Mm-hmm. When you plot that out on a graph, when you look at these 5,000-year cycles, so here we are today, 2012, the beginning of a new cycle, or the end of one that began 5,000 years ago. Well, here's here's what's happening. Archaeological discoveries now are being made that precede that 5,000 year cycle.